Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm playing Drawback chess, where each player gets a random drawback, like Lame Duck, where you can't move your king, or True Gentleman, where you can never capture a queen. My goal is to win 5 games. Let's get started with game number 1. Alright, game number 1, we get the white pieces against Probing Green Alien. Absolutely absurd name, and our drawback is, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, noblesse, oblige? Maybe it's another language. Your royal pieces, kings and queens, can only capture other royal pieces. Okay, that's not too serious. I mean, I guess if a piece were to capture a pawn, for example, near my king, it could be a bit of an issue. But besides that, we should be totally fine. Also, the consensus in the comments last time was to keep our drawback hidden, which is a great relief to me and will give me a better chance during these games. I guess if my opponent reveals their drawback, I will show mine as well, just to be fair, but I won't start off by doing that. We get bishop to g4. As far as our drawback goes, neither our king nor our queen actually needs to capture anything, so we should be totally fine. I mean, queens usually trade for queens anyways. The only thing would be that neither of my royal pieces, that is, can capture any free pieces. So for example here, if I play e3, which I will play anyways because my opponent doesn't know what my drawback is, and my opponent were to take, I wouldn't be able to take back with the queen, I would have to take with the pawn. Okay, we get knight to f6. So far, my opponent hasn't played anything that makes me suspect that anything is going on. We get e6. I'm going to play bishop to d3. I'm just going to play normally. I don't want to give my opponent any signs that, that anything is wrong. Okay, we get pawn to h6. I'll just keep developing as normal. I feel like a lot of these drawbacks involve the king and the queen somehow. So I'm going to keep an eye out to see how this develops. Okay, g5, super aggressive. I'm just going to move my bishop back. Maybe there's ideas of like h4 with the threat of taking since it opens up this pin. Knight to h5, again, very, very aggressive. I'm going to play queen to e2 with the idea that if I wait to castle, right, my opponent can take, I can take back, and I might even leave this rook on this open file and just castle long instead. Okay, queen to d7, opponent playing kind of similarly. Let's play a3. a3 is kind of a prophylactic move, meaning an anticipatory sort of move, where if my opponent castles long and I want to play c4, I don't want to undo the function of the c3 pawn, which is to defend b4, right? So I'll play a3 to defend b4, stop any annoying knight b4 moves. We get this capture, I'll go ahead and take back. As planned before, we've now opened up this file. We can't actually take this pawn and take advantage of the, of the pin. Arrows as bad as always. Wow, that was pretty early too. 4 minutes in and the arrows are bad. Because obviously the knight is pinned, but there is still that idea in the future. Okay, e5, breaking open the center, threatening e4. Wow. No comment, threatening e4, which would win the knight, so I basically have to take. Okay, the time management of the Probing Green Alien is maybe not the best, and that's very ironic coming from me, who probably has the worst time management of all, especially when I get to talking. Oh, queen to e6, doesn't take back. Let's play this. Bishop to b5 will pin the knight, and see what the problem is. What's the problem with the knight? What is my opponent fearing? Oh, maybe it has to do with checks. Oh, well, no, because the queen moved. The queen would have been in the way. I was going to say if my... Oh, long castle. Scratch what I was going to say. Let's focus on the game. 52 seconds left. Long castle. I'm going to play a4 with the very slow but methodical idea of a5, a6. Okay, knight takes. If my opponent takes, I take back. If my opponent takes, I take back. Even with our drawback, there's not really an issue there, so a5 will continue advancing on the queen side, looking for that attack. Okay, a6, we can't actually sacrifice because it's defended twice and we only have one extra piece. So it's either bishop back to d3 or bishop to a4, and I guess d3 makes the most sense. I'm okay with this trade, it's really not the end of the world. Because we get rid of a bishop that doesn't really have a future and trade it off for a knight that is centralized, applying pressure to a pinned piece. Okay, down to 34 seconds for my opponent. We do get 2 seconds increment. One of you guys commented that this +2 means we get 2 seconds increment. So thank you, that was actually very helpful. The bishop takes, we'll go ahead and take back with the knight. If my opponent doesn't take, okay, my opponent does. I was gonna say that, oh, I can't capture with royal pieces. You have to be kidding me. How did I forget? No, and now my opponent's going to know that something's wrong. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's just move the king to f1. No, my opponent is going to know. If my opponent takes here, then I can assume that my opponent clocked what's going on. If my opponent moves the knight away, okay, maybe they don't really have an idea. Wow. Okay, 18 seconds left for my opponent, and we're only down a piece. It's really not the end of the world. It's down a piece in a position where we really shouldn't be down a piece, but it's not the end of the world. This would be the end of the world, though. That would be checkmate. So let's move the knight back. Oh gosh, I hope my opponent has no idea what's going on. Knight to b3. Let's play this. Just playing defense at this point. The attack was stopped by a6. There's no hope of b4, b5, and we're down a piece. So a lot to look forward to here. Let's play king g1, just buying some time. Okay, my opponent takes a free pawn, which is usually a good idea. I guess let's just keep buying time. Let's move the king into a corner. Sure, keep tucking him over to the corner of the board. We're down to 41 seconds. Opponent is still sub 10. Is there any way I can complicate the... If I can complicate the position, I might have some hope. Let's hit the knight. I just need to get my opponent thinking. If I can get my opponent thinking, then I have some hope. I'm going to sack a pawn with hopes of opening up the queen side. Sure, my opponent takes it with no issue. If my opponent takes back, then they understand what is happening. If they don't, oh, they understand. They understand that I can't take back with my queen. But we do get the flag! Holy smokes! Oh, wow, that was not a well-deserved flag. Let's go ahead and pop up the info board. But with that, we do win game number 1. All right, we're looking at the info board. I do apologize that the U1 is a little bit cropped. It says your opponent ran out of time. Yes, your opponent's drawback was reconnaissance. You start being unable to capture. Every turn, you study all the pieces you would be able to capture normally, and once you've studied them for a turn, you can capture that piece type for the rest of the game. Oh, that's really interesting. So my opponent just has to basically observe a piece with another piece. So let's look at an example on the board. So my interpretation, what I understood is that, for example, this bishop is looking at this pawn, aka studying the pawn, and then for the rest of the game, my opponent is allowed to capture pawns. Interesting. I don't think that's terribly difficult. Apparently, ours wasn't terribly difficult either, but we entered a position where I was trying to play tactically with my king in the center and deciding where I was going to launch my attack, and I waited far too long and I left my row of pieces in the center. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 2. All right, game number 2. We get the white pieces again. The center squares are highlighted, so I'm just going to play... Oh, wait, what's the issue here? King of the hill, except for the first turn. If you start your turn without a piece, in the center 4 squares, you lose. Oh, interesting. Oh, and my opponent revealed their drawback as well. Entrenched, your rooks can't move more than 2 squares. Okay, I'm very hesitant to reveal my drawback, but I did say if my opponent revealed it, I would reveal it as well. So I'm going to reveal my drawback to my opponent. My opponent basically has weak rooks that can only move 2 squares at a time or less, and I have to keep some control over the center. That really shouldn't be too difficult with the London system, right? Because there's ideas of like bishop to f4, knight to e5, and frankly, this just makes it easier. I will take a free pawn any day of the week. Queen to d6, very interesting. If I play bishop to f4, there's queen to b4 with check, which drops this pawn. And actually, I'm totally okay with that. I'd be happy for my opponent to go basically pawn hunting while I fortify my center, which is really my biggest issue here. Okay, we get knight to c6, putting more pressure on that knight on e5. Let's play e3. Maybe we'll play bishop to b5. Okay, we get knight takes, bishop takes, sure. Queen to c6. Let's see. I'm going to play knight to d2 with the idea that potentially this knight could come to f3 and then replace the bishop on e5. Sure, and really I just need one piece in the center's 4 squares. So this pawn is already doing that job. Let's move the bishop back. I would like it if my opponent were to take, so I could take back and open up this file. Oh, what a misclick. That's definitely a misclick. Holy smokes. Okay, we're going to go ahead and take that bishop. The poor brave green dolphin drops a piece. Man, oh my, what is happening? Queen to c4. It's not my opponent's drawback. The drawback is just the rooks. Is this throwing? Is this just throwing the game because of this misclick? I feel like my opponent's throwing the rage quitting the game after bishop to f4. Okay, knight to f6, sure. I mean, I'm happy to trade pieces now. Queen to f3, all scholars, mate. That's fine with me. Knight to e4. Let's play queen here, hits the knight, hits f7. Knight to d6 will remove the knight. And like I said, I won't forget my drawback this time like I did on the last game, right? I do have a pawn in the middle, so I'm totally fine. I just need one piece, that's it. One piece in the middle, and I've completed my duty, basically. Not to mention, now the king moves out of the way, I take this pawn, and this rook can't move more than 2 squares, so it's going to lose, it's going to hang the rook no matter where my opponent moves it. Bishop to e6, I'll take with check. King moves up, I'll take the other rook right behind it. Nice, we do drop the bishop, but by all means, take the bishop. Nice, we'll go ahead and displace the bishop, c4, c5, bring the rooks into the game. Pretty intuitive plan. I mean, rooks aren't really worth anything if I can't have them on an open file. King up, I'll go ahead and take. There's no way my opponent can remove the d4 pawn. It's quite literally against the rules. It's impossible. We'll play check. There's no stalemate. There's too many pawns on the board. We'll take with check. Nowhere for my opponent to move the king. And with that, we win game number 2. We'll go ahead and pop up the info board. And it's worth noting that I was confused last time about how you actually won the game. For whatever reason, I had it in my mind that you had to get checkmate. This is a king capture variant. So all of these games, you win them by actually capturing the king or by being unable to fulfill your drawback. So apparently our drawback was significantly more difficult, but I would argue that our opening choice, the London, actually made it decently easy for us. I mean, it's not a very confrontational opening. With that, let's go to move on to game number 2. All right, game number 2, Brave Yellow Monkey. We get the white pieces. Let's play d4. Social distancing. Okay, we get the COVID variant. You cannot make non-capturing moves to squares adjacent to your opponent's pieces. Interesting. Okay, so if I want to play, for example, a bishop next to the knight, I can't unless it's a capturing move. Very amusing. Let's play bishop to f4. So I guess that means I need to grab as much space as possible early on so that my opponent can move next to me and that's not an issue. But if my opponent plays d5, for example, I can't play knight to e5, which cuts off a lot of squares. So let's play knight to d2 with the idea of an early e4. Obviously, we're deviating from the London at this point, but I do have a pretty clear-cut plan of long castling, I think is what I want to do. I'm going to play like c3, bishop here, queen c2, castle long. I have a decent control over the center, and my plan is pretty clear-cut, right? Attack the king side. Bishop to g4. Let's defend it with our bishop. I say defend, what I really mean is cut off the pin. And on the next turn, I'll play queen c2 anyways, castle long, and then maybe I can play, well, I can't play h3 because it's not a capturing move. Interesting. And I can't move d5 either because it's not a capturing move. Wow, this is quite an annoying drawback. I mean, I hope my opponent's drawback is equally difficult. Let's see, if I take, my opponent takes, I can take back, so that should be totally fine. Knight to f4 forces me to capture, really, so I will. Can't leave this weak, and I'm not interested in castling short. Opponent has to take back, which gives me a nice control over the center. Opponent's taking a long... Whoa, opponent doesn't take back! Oh, this is huge. Opponent did not take back. Okay, let's play... Oh, I can't play adjacent moves, that's right. I was going to play bishop to g5 and challenge the queen as well. Let's just move the bishop back. Okay, we are up a piece. Opponent takes, I take back, sure. I guess my opponent's plan here might be to... Oh, never mind. I was going to say to do all those captures and then take here so I can't castle. But no, my opponent takes on f3 first, which is totally fine. And at this point, now that I'm up a piece, I don't need a kingside attack at all. So let's see, can I castle? Takes, I only have 2 defenders, or rather 2 attackers, and my opponent has 2 defenders. That doesn't work. So let's take on c5. I'm fine with losing b2 to these 2 pieces because I am up a full piece and I'm looking to castle anyways. Rook to c8. I mean, it works. I can't really take if my opponent takes back the queen. So I'll go ahead and castle right away. And I feel like this works out neatly. We have a pretty open game, pretty dynamic, means a lot of captures. So I'm in a good spot here. If we had a more closed position where pieces had to like shuffle next to each other, then social distancing would be an issue because I wouldn't be able to place my pieces next to my opponent's pieces. But as long as we're just, you know, open firing across the board, that's totally fine. Okay, bishop takes. There's an interesting idea of like playing bishop to h6, allowing my opponent to take, and then playing for mate. So let's do that. Let's play bishop. Oh, I can't play adjacent. Hold on. That's right. I have to be more long range about this. Okay, let's play bishop to f4 with the idea that takes could lead to bishop e5. Maybe I drop the bishop back to a1 after the rook comes back, queen to c3. The whole thing is a little bit slow, but my whole setup has to be long range anyways, so I don't really have a lot to work with here. Okay, knight to c6 stops e5 right away. Let's threaten the queen, because really, why not? And we should probably play h3 as well, since we have 1 less rook than our opponent, and there could be an idea in the future of back rank mate. Okay, queen to a5, h3. Knight to d4. I could just take. My opponent takes back. Queen to d2. Looks interesting. Let's play that. We have now 2 bishops for a rook and a pawn, which should be very playable. Oh my goodness, my opponent did not take back. Does my opponent have an issue with taking back? Is that their drawback? Oh, I can't even play knight to f5. Okay, let's... Oh, I'm afraid that I'm going to take the pawn my opponent's going to take. Hits the queen, hits the bishop. I guess I could just defend it with queen to d2. Let's give it a try. I mean, I'm a little confused what's happening, but I only have 50 seconds. Okay, my opponent was able to take back after hanging a pawn. I know one of you guys said it's basically futile to even try to guess what the drawback is. What the drawback is, rather, because there are so many. Oh, do I just lose the bishop now? Right, because I can't move this bishop adjacent. Oh, goodness. Okay, ooh, wow, that's pretty bad. Okay, let's take a pawn. If my opponent takes, I just move the bishop back. Okay, my opponent does take. Let's shuffle the bishop back. Takes again. Sure, let's hit this pawn. Rook to d2 simply defends the pawn. Let's play... Ooh, I can't even play e5. Wow. g3, I guess. I mean, I don't really have a clear purpose here. King to g2, really, because why not? And my opponent is just storming for this promotion. I might have to throw a Hail Mary here, because I have 24 seconds left, and not a lot of hope, to be honest. Let's move the king forward, see if we can make something happen. Okay, opponent is about to promote. I might have to throw a Hail Mary check at some point. Oh, and I can't even advance the king any more than that. Let's play bishop here, because why not? Rook takes. Let's move the king out of the way. f6 check. Sure, I keep shuffling over. I mean, we might even be able to get stalemate here, potentially. I don't know if there is stalemate in this variant. Let's defend this pawn by pushing it. Rook to a5. Let's play check. Oh, I can't play that check, and I can't play this check either. Oh, I can't move the bishop at all. Holy smokes. Okay, check this way now. Okay, king forward. If I take, I assume my opponent can just take. But it's not like I really have a choice, so let's take this pawn. My opponent can indeed take. King to g4, I guess, is fine. Rook to e5 threatens the pawn. Let's move the rook out of the way so it's not in check. Or rather, so it's not a forced trade. Right, if my opponent takes and it's hitting the king and the rook, defended by the queen, then I have to trade. I have 3 seconds left, really not a lot to work with here. Opponent has a lot of different ways to finish this off, but is calculating quite a lot. I mean, it must have something to do with captures, unless that was purely to throw me off balance, which if that was the point, it worked. But it must have something to do with captures, so maybe these aren't feasible for some reason. I mean, my opponent could very easily win here with like check, king moves out of the way, check. I wouldn't have any defense. Is my opponent just mogging? Just, I mean, running down the time to play like 2 moves and finish off the game? It's possible. 5 seconds left. What was that? My opponent ran out of time. Oh my goodness. Okay, hold on. Let's see what my opponent's drawback actually was. Okay, opponent's drawback was shell-shocked. Whenever your opponent captures, pieces adjacent to the capture can't move for 1 turn. Oh, that explains everything. Right, let's go back to that bishop. Right here, when I took this piece, my opponent couldn't take back because it was shell-shocked, right? It was adjacent to the knight, so my opponent could not recapture. So my opponent played g5, hitting the bishop, now creating 2 different threats. It does lose a pawn, but it allows my opponent to actually take back the knight. So that's really interesting. My opponent ran out of time, and that frankly seems a little bit unfair to me that I had to sit there while my opponent runs out of time, so I am going to count that victory as victory number 3. I really wish my opponent hadn't run out of time, though, because that endgame was really, really interesting. There weren't many pieces left. If my opponent tries to capture too many pieces, maybe something interesting could happen. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 4. All right, game number 4, we get the white pieces. And our drawback is checkers. Nice, short and sweet, right? Checkers. You must capture if able. Terrible situation. I'm going to go ahead and close up my bishop right away, and then play like knight to e2 to close up this bishop as well. Because that is disgusting. That is a disgusting drawback. I would love if my opponent got that drawback. Let me be very clear. But for me, terrible situation. Even if c5 I have to take, if d4 I have to take. We get bishop to b7. I'm very curious what my opponent's drawback is, because I'm basically playing anti-chess. I'm playing giveaway chess, basically. Except I don't want to lose, so it's even worse. So we'll see what my opponent is dealing with. I'm going to play very passively. g6, and I basically have to make sure that my opponent can't create any unfair trades. So, like for example, if I fianchetto here, then I'd be forced to capture, so that would be an unfair trade. Let's play b3 with the idea of fianchettoing into a pawn structure. Queen c2, then I can at least castle my king to the queen side. Okay, knight to f6. Clearly my opponent's drawback is not the same as mine, or else this capture, wow, terrible arrow. Or else this capture would have been forced. Bishop to g7. I can't even play queen c2 because then I'd have to lose my queen. You know, I tried my best on that arrow, I really did. Let's play h3. Just, I guess passive is the only thing I can do here. Play passively. I'm afraid to even move this knight because it would unleash the bishop. Even a6, I'd have to capture it. So let's play a4. Maybe if I lead with my pawns, it's not so bad. e6, sure. Let's play rook to c1. My opponent must be scratching their head wondering what on earth my opening is. Because my opponent has simply done a double fianchetto, which could very well be a coping mechanism for whatever my opponent's drawback is, but could also be just what they decided to play. We get a5. I'm very hesitant to start any sort of battle. If I open up the position, I can be lured into very unfavorable trades. So, actually, wait, I can move this knight now. There's still the risk of like h5, I'd have to sack the knight, but this bishop isn't at risk anymore, right? b5 is just a free pawn, then it's looking at a fair trade. Bishop a6 is a fair trade. So I can actually develop this bishop now, potentially to e2 actually. So let's do that. If h5, it might look like I'm going crazy and sacrificing a piece for 2 pawns, which I'm totally fine with. g4, we get a kingside attack going. And I can play crazy for 1 game. That's totally fine with me. Knight goes back. Let's do that. Let's lean into this kingside attack. Let's play knight to f3. c5 means I have to take. Right away, it highlighted that square. I had no choice. Hopefully my opponent doesn't read into how quickly I played that. No! Oh my goodness. Queen is looking at the pawn. Is anything else looking at that pawn? Nothing. Nothing else is looking at that pawn. Just the queen. Just the good old queen looking at the pawn. Oh, terrible situation. Okay, scratch the kingside attack. I'm castling. That was awful. Okay, please, I need a symptom. I need a symptom of any kind. Okay, my opponent clearly is picking up what I'm putting down and is offering trades because I have to accept them. Which it may seem fine, right? I win a free pawn, but no, my bishop is then looking at f7, which is a terrible situation. Ooh, knight to e6. My opponent didn't recapture. Let's take back. And now my opponent recaptures. It could be like an even-odd thing where my opponent can't recapture on odd moves. Let's play c4, just out of curiosity. We're on an odd move now. Bishop takes. I'll take back with my bishop. There were actually 2 different trades there, which is kind of interesting. Okay, we're on an even move. So, if I sack, my opponent will just take with the knight, though. Ah, very nice. Let's take this rook, which wins us material either way. And now we're on an odd move. So maybe by taking, I can win the piece? No, my opponent just recaptured. And look at me. Look at me now, losing a knight on h5. Oh, wow. Okay, it's definitely not even odd. Okay, let's line up the rook on the open file. We are losing by a lot of material. Knight to d8 forces me to take. It feels very clear that my opponent knows what's going on. Let's push a pawn because why not? And I really have no idea what my opponent's drawback might be. It can't be light and dark squares because my opponent captured on both of those. They can't be even odd. We already ruled that out. Maybe my opponent's drawback is shell-shocked. Would that make sense? I'm trying to remember now what that first weird recapture was. Okay, rook to d3. Let's just keep pushing the pawn, I guess. I mean, if my opponent doesn't stop it, I'm gonna promote it 100%. Queen to d6. If I play here, check, takes. King here, and then queen goes back to give check, and then I lose the pawn. But I guess it's worth a shot. Let's give it a try. We do get that check. I have no choice but to take. King to h2. Even this check would lose the pawn, right? Let's play g3. Uh-oh. My opponent didn't take it. Wait a minute, maybe my opponent can't take pawns. Which is interesting, because if I promote, then my opponent can just take the promoted piece, which would not be a pawn. Or maybe my opponent can't capture with minor pieces? Ah, it's a huge risk, because if I leave the pawn here, my opponent may very well just take it on the next turn. But if I promote it, then it might not feed into their drawback. I'm going to promote. I kind of have to. I'm going to promote and give check. My opponent immediately takes. Fine. Let's play h4. f5, sure, we'll just shuffle the king around for a little bit. I might test my hypothesis. Let's play e4 and see if my opponent can take it. Well, actually, wait, what am I talking about? Of course my opponent can take pawns. How would I have lost other pawns? Oh, and oh my goodness. Wow, that's such a good way to end the game. I have to take, in the end, I do lose to my drawback, and my opponent can just take my king. Oh my goodness. My opponent just revealed their drawback. Gambler can't move a specific piece type, re-randomize every single move. That's really not even that terrible, to be honest. Okay, hopefully my opponent gets queen again. I've revealed my drawback to my opponent as well, that I have to capture. And as long as my opponent can move the queen, then I lose the game. Oh, maybe my opponent couldn't move the queen again. Okay, let's move the king. But the issue is that I can't see what my opponent's randomized piece that they can't move is. Okay, king moves up. Let's play f3. I really could gamble here. Okay, queen. It was queen that time. Now here's the thing. 5 seconds. I'm going to play king to g4. That's it. If my opponent gets queen, then I might win. My opponent got something else. Okay. We did lose that game. Let's go ahead and pop up the info board. All right, with that, we lose game number 4. Opponent's drawback, we already saw. Apparently, we got a much more difficult drawback than my opponent, which I agree with. Playing anti-chess, but you're actually trying to win is very counterintuitive and quite difficult. Pretty interesting game. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 5. All right, game number 5. We get the black pieces this time. Crusade for 4 consecutive moves. Starting on move 14, you must end your turn occupying e3. You have got to be kidding me. That's the square I need to occupy? I need to occupy it, which means I need to actually have a piece placed on e3. Okay, we're bum rushing the center of the board. It has to be. I wonder how difficult my opponent's drawback is, because that is a ridiculous drawback. Okay, let's play c5, looking for d4, I guess. I have to reach into that square somehow, and right now, it is amply defended. Wow, I tried twice there. Amply defended, so let's play d4. Maybe if I can displace the pawn, we might be okay. Okay, that's better, I guess. Knight takes? Take with the queen? Okay, my opponent's drawback must be cataclysmic, because this is quite strange play. I could also just go for checkmate, although that's a little bit risky, because then if I don't fight for e3 and I don't get checkmate, then I lose. Let's start with knight to f6. If nothing else, maybe I should play like e5, e4, e3 somehow. Okay, we do get d3, so that's promising at least. Let's see, bishop g4 is interesting. Takes. Let's play e5. Let's continue with the plan. 7 turns left, where in that time we either need to occupy e3 or we need to capture the opponent's king. c3 boots the queen. We really have no choice but to move her, so let's move her out of the way. And I think our little combo plan here is going to be e4, bishop d6. We either get checkmate and win the king, or maybe somehow we can push that pawn all the way to e3. Bishop to e3, there's now a piece occupying that square, which is pretty bad news for us. Bishop takes, let's move e4 nice and quick. Oh no, your bishop, move your bishop, nice! Queen takes h2, we have 3 turns remaining, but there's no way to defend the king, it's impossible. Nice, and with that, we actually win game number 5, despite how terrible that drawback was. Let's go ahead and pop up that info board. Just to be clear, we win game number 5, but we only have 4 victories under our belt. Okay, we won. You took your opponent's king, excellent. Your opponent's drawback was checkers. My opponent got our drawback. Wow, that is a terrible drawback. My poor opponent. Terrible situation. And arguably, yes, our opponent's drawback was actually slightly more difficult than ours, despite how crazy that seems, considering how hard our drawback was. We have 4 wins under our belt. Let's go ahead and move on to game number 6. All right, game number 6, we get the black pieces. Our drawback is Gloomstalker. You can only capture from dark squares. Okay, that's actually not that bad. I feel like we can conceal that decently. Let's play d6. My opponent's going to line up the bishop on the long diagonal, so c6. Obviously, if my opponent takes, pretty much the game is over because it's a straight line to my king and I lose, but my opponent doesn't know my drawback, so my opponent has no reason to take on c6. Let's go ahead and fianchetto ourselves, which is good. We're fianchettoing on a dark square, meaning we're going to be fighting for dark squares, mostly anyways, meaning we are up for captures on those squares. Effectively, we can only take on half of the squares on the whole board. So I'm hoping that our opponent's drawback is equally difficult. Let's play e5, again, fighting for those dark squares. Bishop to e6, just regular development. We have to keep up at least the act that we are capable of capturing on any square, even if we are clearly not. Let's play knight to e8 with the idea of f5. With any luck, our opponent's drawback is cataclysmic, and we can actually intimidate them into a loss, basically, into submitting to the attack. We get knight back to d1. Let's move the king to h8. I usually just like to get my king off this weak diagonal. e4. If we allow this capture, it basically loses the game and reveals our drawback. So f4 is pretty necessary. Takes, because I could just be a bad player that doesn't know that that loses a pawn, and it would open up some lines of attack, which could be interesting. So let's play f4. Not to mention there's an idea of f3, and by introducing captures, we might discover something about our opponent's drawback, which hopefully has to do with captures as well. Ooh, very nice. f3, let's take. Now my opponent has no reason to suspect I can't take like a normal chess player. My opponent takes back on g3. Let's move the knight back to f6, potentially f4. We take this weak spot. We're totally fine with recapturing because that's a dark square. King to f2 openly walks into this check, so I'm going to deliver that check and force the king back to e1. Okay, king does move back to e1. Let's play knight to h2, hit the rook. Oh, wait, I should have calculated that way better. Okay, this knight can't actually take on f3 because wait, can I? Gloom Stalker, you can only... Wait, I misunderstood this whole time. Okay, wait, our drawback actually isn't that difficult. Our opponent might have a relatively easy drawback. Gloom Stalker, you can only capture from dark squares. I can capture onto any square, so I can capture here with check just fine. The only thing is I have to be coming from a dark square. Okay, that changes the whole situation. Rook can take back because it's moving from a dark square. Wow, I wonder how many of you guys caught that and were just listening to me explain that incorrectly the whole time. I do apologize. Wow, really should have read that a little more carefully. You can only capture from dark squares, not on dark squares. Okay, cool. It's a good thing that our opponent has played relatively normally this whole time. So let's go ahead and move back, put our rook on a dark square now that we know what the drawback is correctly. Queen to c3 is very amusing. Let's play queen to f6 with the obvious idea of queen takes f2, moving from a dark square, so that's good. Oh, nice. We'll take, absolutely free. If the rook threatens our queen, I might even, lose my mind a little bit and just take. Ooh, that's so tempting. Okay, but I have an even better idea. Let's play check first. Check forces the king to move back. We win the free rook. King does move back. We take with check. Queen has to move back as well. I can't capture the queen because my queen would be moving from a light square. So let's just move back, I guess. Maybe queen to e3 could be quite annoying for my opponent to deal with. Bishop to c1. I actually can take that because I'm moving from a dark square. And let's play check. We're up so much material that really shouldn't be any way for my opponent to make a comeback. Let's play a5. And the obvious idea here is just throw, whoops, that's not how the knight moves, throw all of my pieces at my opponent's king and somehow take home the victory. Okay, rook to c1. I can't capture from a light square, so I kind of need my opponent to take this. Let's just play knight to c5. Maybe I can sacrifice, could be interesting. King to b1. Wow, that's a very interesting choice. Let's play rook to f2. We're threatening the knight. Both of these pieces are in dark squares, so it's actually a pressing issue for my opponent. I gotta be honest, I'm dying to know what my opponent's drawback is because the play has been very strange. So one of two things. My opponent has an awful drawback, and they're just a much stronger player than I am, or my opponent might have also misread their drawback, which would be quite funny. Queen to g1. Let's go ahead and take the knight. Surely... Oh! And we get the resignation. Nice. I was going to say, surely we can sacrifice the knight on d3, looking to open up the opponent's king. But let's go ahead and pop up that info board. With that, we win game number 6, which is our 5th victory. And our opponent's drawback was apparently easier than ours. Opponent's drawback was comfort zone. If you can move to f5, you must. Okay, well, that explains why we got the open file so quickly. But not much else. That wasn't really such a terrible drawback. Very interesting. I would argue that our drawback was more difficult. Anyways, with that, we do win 5 games. If you did enjoy this video, please consider liking and subscribing. Let me know down below if you guys enjoyed Drawback Chess, or if there are any other variants you guys would like me to try, and I will see you guys in the next one.